Hi everybody, welcome back to the second part of this new Airfix Jaguar build. It's a newish kit just released in the UK the end of March, and in the first episode you can see that I've got the fuselage assembled, built the cockpit and the undercarriage bays. That was quite a bit of work, and I suspect that's probably the bulk of the kit really once you've got to this stage. Following the last episode, I got lots of very constructive feedback about the undercarriage bays, and as a result of that I went back in and added a little bit more paint detail to the undercarriage bays. Painted some of the boxes in black and some of the pipework in a natural metal colour. For that I used Tamiya lacquer aluminium, and that's just added a little bit more interest and hopefully a bit more accuracy to the finish in the wheelbase. The other bit of work that I've done is just to repair all the seams just along the spine here and the nose, and there's quite a bit of work to do on the underside to get a nice smooth join, although the stores rack here, the centerline rack, does save the need to do a lot of sanding on the underside. Spans really most of the join line, as you can see. The plate that we fitted towards the end of the last episode has fared in really nicely. I've just done a little bit of rescribing around there, and on the nose section here rescribed these panel lines, so that's all nice and neat, ready for the rest of the primer and top coats. As you can see, I've just used some Mr. Surfacer 1500 grey just to check the work, just to make sure we're not going to be left with any seams visible on those joints, and we're pretty much good to go. There's just a little bit more work to do on the back here, but I'll get round to that when I do the rest of the seam work. So moving on, what I want to do now is build the rest of the components for the airframe, and we'll start off this week with the wings. So Airfix mould the wings as a one-piece top surface and just a couple of panels to go on the underside, and these are really nicely done. It was a feature that I noticed in the Lysander build, that Airfix have moulded the leading edges integral, if you like, so they wrap around onto a panel line on the underside. So that saves you doing any filling and sanding along the front edge of a wing join in this case. That's a really nice development. It's a really good way of designing the kit. So we'll get the other panel on. I've already done the starboard side, so we just need to drill some holes out for the pylons, and then we can get the other panel fitted. The horizontal stabilizers are just single piece units. The fin has one insert. I guess it's moulded like that to avoid any sink marks in the plastic, because it's quite thick at the bottom end. And on the opposite side we've got the housing for, I don't know what it is, some sort of antenna presumably. Next we've got the intakes, and these are a two-part assembly, and for this Airfix give us this little jig just to line the two parts up. Now I found that a little bit fiddly to use the jig, so I ended up just putting this together by eye, and it didn't really cause any problems. We'll just do the other one and I'll show you what I mean. I suppose one thing that Airfix will be criticised for is not providing any engine faces. So these intakes just go into a black hole basically. Now, I'm not going to get too excited about that. The intakes are quite deep and you really can't see very much through them. They're quite small at the mouth, as you can see. Now I think it's a simple enough job just to hold those together and run some extra thin into them. But Airfix give you this jig just to position the parts, but I just found it hard to hold it on the jig, and I really couldn't see how you could go far wrong just assembling the parts in your hand. Nevertheless, we'll use the jig. And I found it just comes apart really, so I think that's a little bit superfluous. I'm sure most of us can assemble two pieces like that without too much bother. Just make sure that the rear face is aligned. So I suppose it's a nice idea, but in my opinion it's a bit of overkill really. I'll just give these a squirt of paint before fitting them. It'll just be easier to get the paint in before they're fitted to the main airframe. Airfix give us a set of control surfaces for the wings. I'll fit them in the drooped position. I think that's all it tells us to do in the instructions. There's no mention of cutting the tabs off and fitting them closed up. And I always think that a model looks better with the control surfaces extended. Get some leading edge slats as well. You just need to be careful what you're cutting off here. These parts here are linkages for the slats. They're not sprue gates, so don't sand those off. Airfix mould these blisters as separate parts for the control surfaces, because if they'd tried to mould them integrally they would probably have ended up with some sink marks on the top surface. The problem with them is that they're very awkward to hold just because of the shape, and you do need to do a little bit of sanding to get the sprue gate off. So if you just hold the part in a bit of blue tack, it just reduces the risk of it flying across the model room and losing it forever. I would suggest fitting these blisters one by one, because they're all individually sized, and I suspect that if you get them mixed up they won't fit properly. So don't be fooled by this very outboard blister. It is meant to extend beyond the edge of the control surface there. So eventually these locate via these tabs and just sit on the back of the wing like that. This is just a bit of Mr. Surfacer 500. Just running that into the join between the undersurface and the top. It just evens up that panel line a little bit. And then just take a little bit of lacquer thinners and just wipe off the excess. And the effect of that is it just blends the two parts together a little bit better. Okay, we'll get the wing fitted. I've test fitted this and it's really nice. We just need to clamp it at the front to get a seamless fit. And I'm just getting a little bit of an obstruction at the front here, so it's just a bit of glue that's seeped out. And it's just preventing the wing from sitting down properly. So let's try again. So with a bit of work you can get that to fit absolutely flush. So basically all I've done is take some material off the leading edge here, both sides, and this part of the spine where it joins onto the fuselage at this point. And once you've done that you get a really nice drop fit, nice and flush. Just put a couple of clamps across the joint just to hold it nice and flush. Actually, we don't need those clamps. That sanding work has just meant that that sits there in the correct place on its own. So I'll leave that to dry for a little bit, just prepare some other parts ready to go onto the airframe. On the fin, Airfix have moulded a tiny indentation so that we can drill a couple of holes. So I'll just mark those with a needle, and we're going to drill a 0.7mm hole all the way through the fin, there for some antenna that we fit later on. This is a 0.7mm drill. I just need to do a little bit of filling on this insert because it's just left a seam line, a horizontal seam line, which I want to get rid of. Again, we get another jig to use on this part because we need to drill a single hole for our version. The jig gives you two holes, which you would use for the other versions in the kit. So ours goes to starboard. Now I'll just mark it, rather than put a drill through the jig, I'll just put a pin through just to mark the position. Now I suppose Airfix couldn't mould that hole in the part because it's very close to the edge. So I'm going to carefully do this by hand rather than use the motor tool. Now, not too long ago, these sort of insert panels would have been Airfix's downfall, but they've improved an awful lot, and these are pretty seamless. They need blending in a little bit, but on the whole, they're a big improvement on what we've had in the past. I've just got this fin cleaned up, just needed a little bit of a sand down. And a tiny bit of rescribing, and then that's ready to fit. One thing I remember from the previous Airfix 148 scale Jaguar, which was probably from the 1980s, was the lack of detail in the area of the guns. And that was just down to the moulding limitations at the time. I recall having some resin cannon bulges here, or these vents at the back, because they couldn't be provided in the kit plastic. This is an age away from that. The way that these parts have been moulded is really quite a bit different. Of course, the technology's moved on so much since then. Our version has the overwing launch rails, which is what these parts are. So just be careful not to get the horizontal stabilisers mixed up. They do have a kink in them on the trailing edge. This is a little bulkhead that I've made, and it's for the inside of the chin glazing. I'm just going to add a little bit of detail to this with something that's supposed to represent the laser inside. And this is just a tiny little bit of, it's actually an ejector pin, but in this case it's rounded, so it gives the appearance of a lens. I'll just back that with a bit of silver. So we just get the impression of the lens through those glazing panels at the chin here. So I'll use some Canopy glue to attach this part and the canopy, which I'll do in a moment. I'll give that an undercoat as well with some black after I've masked off the transparency area. Before we deal with the canopies, I just want to do a little bit of work on the combing here. I've got an instrument box to fit on the starboard side, and there's a panel to go on the left hand side here as well. So this instrument box here I'll just make out of some scrap styrene. This is just a piece of scrap photo etch, just to add a little bit of interest. It's not strictly accurate. Okay, we can fit the windscreen now, and I have read on a couple of reviews that some people have had problems with their canopy parts, with them being flawed, but there is a tiny little mark on this windscreen right down at the front, and it looks like it's coming from the sprue gate. Now it's going to be noisy for another 5 minutes because the sheep are just getting fed, so they're pretty excited about getting the dinner, but I can't really delay because I've started putting the glue on this, so I want to get it done. Okay, so those transparencies are a really nice fit, but just to make sure that they're sealed up so I don't get any paint inside, I'll just run some PVA around the outside and wipe it off with a cotton bud, one of these sharpened Tamiya ones, and that'll just seal things up just to avoid any paint creep underneath and spoiling the canopy. But I'll do that once the initial PVA is dried. Just while I'm waiting for that canopy to dry, I'll just spend a bit of time to get some other parts together. These are the pylons. This is the centerline rack. The advantage of just spending some time and gluing all these pylons and stores together at this stage is that you can just leave them to one side, let them dry completely, and then probably another week before I come back to these and sand them down, get rid of the seams. But those few days just gives them plenty of chance to set up properly. Okay, so with all the building work done, it's time to get some colour on this, and I'm going to do a little bit of shading on it. We've already got the base brown, which will tone with the desert sand, but I want to get a little bit of variation into the airframe. The aircraft, by the time it had been in the Gulf for a while, was pretty grimy and quite a patchwork effect on the paintwork. So we're going to try and replicate that. So what we'll do is, first of all, mist in some tan colour, a very pale tan, and I'm going to use Tamiya deck tan, whitened down, with quite a bit of white in it, so we'll get that patchy effect on the airframe. And then when I put the MRP desert tan over the top, it should break the colour up a little bit. That's what we want. We don't want a flat shade, especially when the whole airframe is one colour. Okay, so I think that's enough in terms of shading for now. Might have to add a little bit later on after the weathering stage, but we'll just have to see how that weathering goes when we come to do that. What I want to do now is get the top coat on, which is an overall Desert Pink. This is MRP 185, which is meant to be quite a good match for this RAF colour. So we'll see anyway. When it's applied, it can alter quite a bit depending on the base colour that it's going on, but let's get some on and we'll see how we go on with it. Right, so the airframe's painted, as you can see, and I quite like the MRP colour for RAF Desert Pink. It's just a warm tan really, I suppose, rather than a pink per se, but it's a very difficult colour to capture. It looks different on various photographs depending on the lighting conditions, and quite often here in the shed under the camera lights, colours do look a little bit different to what I'm seeing to my eye. But it looks right, so I'm going to leave it at that. So I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out. And what I'm going to do next, before the next episode, is give the whole airframe a coat of this, which is Tamiya LP9 Lacquer Gloss. This goes on really nicely, nice and smooth. I usually give it a couple of very thin coats, thinned something like 70% with lacquer thinners. And it doesn't need much more than that to get a finish ready for the decals. So I'll do that before the next episode, as I said, and we'll crack on straight away in part 3 with the decal work and the final finishing of the model. So she'll be all done by the end of part 3. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll get this varnish coat on, and hopefully you'll join me for the final episode when I get to finish the model, probably by next week. So thanks for looking in, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.